Okay, welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm J.R. Stewart.
And I'm Tommy Duncan.
And we are back. We took a little bit of a vacation, but we're back now. So, Tom, let's talk a little history. I think you were telling me while you were out of town one weekend how you were reading or rereading some works on Malcolm X, speeches or memoirs? Or
Absolutely. There was a book that I got a little bit over a decade ago called By Any Means Necessary. It was speeches and interviews from the last 2, maybe 3 years of Malcolm while he was living. So I believe that's probably from 62 or 63 to 65.
Okay. Now, actually, I went out and found the book on Audible. So I haven't listened to it all yet, but I will. And so, Tom, let's talk a little Malcolm X from a historical perspective. I think Malcolm was probably very misunderstood.
Yeah, and that's primarily because he was. It was primarily because of the media and at that period of time, the government's strategy against the Nation of Islam, as well, because of course he was the national spokesperson for the Nation of Islam, and Elijah Muhammad, who was the leader of the Nation of Islam at that time.
And so, what struck me from listening to some of the interviews was just how articulate Malcolm X was.
Absolutely.
Great vocabulary, great diction. He was a person who didn't finish high school.
He did not. He actually was one of the smartest kids in his school. He grew up, actually was born in Omaha, Nebraska, and I think his family moved to Lansing. Well, he moved to Lansing, Michigan a little bit later on in life, but he did not finish school. And one of the interesting things that in reading his, if you have not read it, you have to read the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley, the same guy who, of course, made Roots. But he said that when he was a young kid in school, he told his teacher that he wanted to be an attorney.
Lord,
and
yes.
The teacher told him that being an attorney wasn't a realistic goal for a young black male. Of course, this was a long time ago. He was born in 1925, but at any rate, he ended up moving to Michigan to live with his sister, and then to New York, and ended up not finishing high school, but actually educated himself. He self-educated himself to probably be one of the premier thought leaders in America at that time.
And just imagine that. I think some of that still goes on today, Tom.
Exact same thing.
I think we have teachers and counselors who are advising black kids not to go to college and be realistic and get a trade or go get a job rather than pursue higher education.
I would agree.
And that's a shame that it's still going on even today. The other thing that I was fascinated by is that when he was in prison, that he read the dictionary.
Yes, he did.
Go through
from the very first page to the very last page.
And I mean, that's, I guess it was a good use of your time, but I guess it taught him how to develop a good vocabulary and speaking skill. Not just that, Tom. It's one thing to be able to memorize a word, regurgitate it. There's a whole other thing to be able to use it constructively in a sentence. But then the other thing was the logic and the mental extrapolation of data to a conclusion that Malcolm X was able to do. I mean, he would give you these stories and scenarios that would help lend to what he was trying to explain, where it didn't necessarily have to talk his way through it. He can kind of give you a little story that helps explain. But mental keenness, I mean, he was sharp as a pencil, man.
Yeah, he was. And I think that's the interesting thing that I discovered about Malcolm growing up, because, of course, as kids, most of us knew Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes.
We knew maybe a little bit about Frederick Douglass, but They didn't teach us anything about Malcolm X while I was in school. I didn't learn about Malcolm X until I was out of school.
Well, man, I'm gonna be totally honest. I mean, I went to predominantly white schools growing up, and generally, if Malcolm X's name ever came up, it was, he was a criminal, he was an agitator, he was, a person who was stirring up the community, stirring good black people up to do bad things.
Exactly.
So nothing really positive. I'm not even sure, even today, that the nation really has a positive image of Malcolm X.
Not as a whole. I don't believe that mainstream America has a true appreciation for what Malcolm did for America. I think that a lot of cities where you have significant populations of black people will appreciate Malcolm, especially if they were poor, because Malcolm, the nation at that time, and then later after Malcolm broke with the Nation of Islam, he spoke to those who were the have-notiest of the have-nots, the poor, those folks who were struggling, those folks who were jobless, those folks who were homeless. And the reality of it is, as intelligent as he was, Jimmy, the brilliant thing about it is that he kept his message very simple so people could understand. And it's interesting.
Very true. One of the things, Tom, is let's talk about how some of the things that Malcolm observed in the 60s compared to where we are now.
Right.
One of the things he talked about was people, new immigrants coming here with nothing. I mean nothing.
Yes.
Lint in their pocket. And able to come together, work, pool their resources, and before you know it, they're the leaders of society. But he talked about how black folks have been here
400 years.
Yes, all this time, and we're still at the bottom. And it's that somehow we haven't done the one thing that other groups have done, which is pool our resources. So you say, you can't be wrong for me saying this. Like, I may get criticized for talking this way, but white people do this. They don't talk about it, they just do it.
Right.
And even today, we're still struggling to come together and do anything. We have successful black people.
Yes, we do.
But these are black people who have done things on their own. Very little collaboration or coming together to do anything. It's always, that's why we have pockets. One person here, one person there who's successful, rather than thousands upon thousands of us being successful at the same time by helping each other and working together.
Right. And I guess one of the things that Malcolm brought up is that we have been programmed and trained to become codependent to other communities. At the time, obviously, during slavery, during the time that our ancestors were living, we had no choice because we were forced into slavery. But after that, there was a psychological, what he called mental colonialism. And so we were trained and programmed to be dependent upon other communities for everything that we did. Even today, Jimmy, less than 1% of our spend overall coming from basically the nation of black people in this country goes to other black businesses. And he said that is not a way that we're going to gain any type of respect or freedom. And his main thing was gaining respect for your people. One of the key things that he did after breaking with the Nation of Islam is he took multiple trips to Africa. He went to Mecca for the Hajj, and one of the things he learned is not just that Islam was, of course, an international religion made of folks of all ethnicities, but it broadened his scope on some things, and he learned that unification is the only answer to black folks in America in terms of achieving respect or power, and without that, you have nothing.
I'd imagine that going to Saudi Arabia and seeing all those people, millions of people there, like you said, different backgrounds, different prosperity levels, different ethnic and cultural levels, and seeing all the people being able to come together and not focus on their differences, but focus on the one thing, their religion, that was bringing them all together.
Absolutely.
But in trying to bring that message of unity back to America, what do you think it would be if he hadn't been killed? If let's say if he was still alive today, I mean, he'd be in his 90s.
I don't, unfortunately,
what
Jimmy.
Do you think his legacy would have been?
I think his legacy would have been the same as it would have been today, but
you think so? I think he would have had more of an impact.
I believe he would have had more of an impact, but Jimmy, I don't know that Malcolm had the option of staying alive because he was too dangerous to those who were in power in mainstream America. The reality of it is, when he began talking about taking America not to the Supreme Court but to the World Court for what it had done to an entire nation of black people in America, and not putting America on trial in America, but putting America on trial in the World Court because of its human rights violations, clear human rights violations, I don't know that there was an option for Malcolm living a normal, long life, because he was too much of a threat of, one, bringing the nation of the descendants of Africans together, and then also holding America accountable to his promise for providing an opportunity for every man and woman in the country. And so for those who are in power, that was too dangerous of a message. I believe that if he would have lived, that there would have been a dramatic change in terms of the direction of our community in particular. But I just think it would have been a very, very hard bet because of his message that they would have allowed him to live that long. Either way.
I think you're right, Tom, and because I remember back when I was in college, and Jesse Jackson was running for president. I think maybe this is his second time to run. I'm not sure, first or second. But I remember when he made a statement that got my attention. And normally I wouldn't pay that much attention to Jesse Jackson because our politics just disagree. But he said that black people have trillions of dollars of their money stuck on Wall Street in 401ks. Mm-hmm. And that if he was elected, that he would allow black people, groups, to take some of that money, pull it out to rebuild the black community. And I was like, you know what? That's a plan I can get with. You know, now me and Jesse are on the same page.
And now you know why Jesse wasn't elected.
Now Jesse wasn't killed, thankfully.
Yeah.
But they did get him out because I think he was leading the polls at that point. He may have even cruised on to a victory if it wasn't for that. But after that, boy, he got character assassinated and he was out of there.
Absolutely.
So,
and I guess, America is not completely dependent, but it's too dependent on the generosity of our community.
Because we're spenders.
Absolutely, and we don't spend in building our own economy or our own industries, but on other folks'. And as a result, America is very codependent on us continuing not to build our own economies.
That is true. So that is true. So let's talk about a little bit about Malcolm's perspective on the political parties.
Sure.
One of his speeches, he talked about the fox and the wolf.
Yes.
And he said that the fox would always get, or the fox and the lamb, it was a chicken or the lamb, one of those domestic animals. But he said the fox always got more because it was cunning.
Right.
And that the wolf would get some, but the fox would always get more. And he was referencing both political parties,
Correct.
Republicans and Democrats.
Right.
But he said Democrats are more cunning with their message. That, you know, maybe Republicans don't pay any attention to you, but the Democrats are lying to you and deceiving you. And as a result, they get your vote, but they don't do anything in return for you. And has that, since the 60s, has that really changed very much even today?
I don't know that it's changed dramatically, Jimmy, at the end of the day. You know, as a whole, the black community is still exploited. It's still relatively completely codependent on other communities.
Yes,
they still really have no true power economically or politically. And so I don't know that anything has changed dramatically, but, you know, the politics, Malcolm's politics was very clear. It's like, you know, I wouldn't vote for the Democratic or the Republican Party. He literally said in his message, you should be an independent, because at the end of the day, both of them are exploiting you. Both of them are exploiting you. So what you need to do is you need to have your gun loaded and you need to vote your interest, not Republican or Democrat, but vote your interest. And if you vote someone into office and they don't do what they say they're going to do for you specifically, vote them out.
Vote them out.
He said you would be crazy to be a Democrat or Republican, and he said you would be a traitor to your race because both of them are exploiting.
So very good message, and people, we really need to consider the advice of Malcolm. I'm not necessarily saying become an independent, but make people earn your vote. Make both parties earn your vote, or make either one of them earn your vote. But don't just give it away to anyone. So if they're not willing, if they're not representing your interests or the interests of your people, your community, your children, don't give them your vote. You can write in Mickey Mouse if you want to as a protest vote. But you're still making a statement by even writing in a non-candidate, by letting them know that in the future you need to work for this. And if you don't do what you say you're going to do for us when you get in power, then we'll vote you out.
Right.
Here's one of the things, Tom. The former DA down in Dallas County, Craig Watson.
Right, Craig Watkins.
I was very surprised he didn't get reelected. I don't know how in the world that happened.
Easy. He was starting to. He started getting a bunch of brothers off who had been wrongfully in prison.
And that's why I say he's the only Democrat that I would ever consider. I didn't live in Dallas County at the time he was running for re-election or election, but I was so impressed with his work because here's somebody that we invested the power. The district attorney is the one who signed warrants to have people arrested.
Right.
I mean, the final decision maker on whether you go to court or not. And he took the power of his office and went out and started testing rape kits, doing DNA tests on them, and only to discover some of these men are actually innocent.
Absolutely.
That the DNA shows
had been in prison for 20 years, 30 years.
Tom, some of them had no priors, no prior conviction, no problems in life. And how do you end up with one charge against you, end up in prison 20 or 30 years, and no one even bothered to take the kit, then test it for DNA? That's what it's there for. And people accused him of wasting public money. In fact, I read one headline that says, one person criticized him saying, your job is to put people in jail, not to get them out.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, Jimmy, unfortunately, when we look at the, and I know this quite well, the business of putting people in jail is a big business. It generates billions of dollars.
Yes.
Even when we look at outsourcing business, whether it's overseas, people do not understand the amount of work that's being done in our prison systems that's lowering the cost of labor.
Now,
driving big business.
I want to segue into this about the whole prison system, not necessarily the prison system, but what happened here recently with our Supreme Court nominee. And this is why I just don't understand how our people, black people, could be involved in this movement with some of these silly folks out here protesting. Tom, I don't know, how long has it been since the DA's been out of office? Maybe 10 years, maybe?
It's been a few years.
If he found 34 men who were wrongly in prison in Dallas County in his one term in office,
yes,
I can imagine there are hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 in the state of Texas alone, let alone across America. And I would imagine that the only reason I could foresee these kids not being tested for DNA is because in most cases they had the golden goose. They had a white woman who was willing to testify that this man did this to me.
Right.
What is more impressive in a court than the testimony of a white woman? Do we really want to go back to the days where a white woman, just on her testimony alone, can land you, forget just ruining your career, ruining your life, put you in prison, and once you're in there, 20, 30 years, Tom, I mean, I wouldn't even know what to do if it happened to me, and to come out of there 30 years later, I would be the angriest person in the universe. There's no amount of money, there's no number of apologies that anybody could say to me at that point. And all these men seem to be grateful to get out. They didn't seem to be...
They probably did some type of program before they got out of there. I don't know, Jimmy, because I would agree with you. I don't know how I could have gotten out of prison after 20 to 30 years of... Because a lot of these guys were in their early 20s, late teens, early 20s. And some of the best years of their life, most productive work years of their life were still in prison. And I could understand if you did it. Yes. But you didn't do it.
Yes.
20 to 30 years, I just don't know. I mean, those are some very strong brothers.
And of course, the University of Michigan, they're Michigan Law School. Mm-hmm. They have I think they call it the Freedom Program. Mm-hmm. I can't think of the professor's name, Schmuck, who worked on the OJ case. Okay. Anyway, him and his students, they have this program where they go out and fight for cases like this, to get the DNA kits tested, to prove innocence, and they've freed hundreds, and over the years they've been able to get a ton of men out of jail. And I really just don't understand as a society why something as simple as a DNA test is just not done. I mean, I know it's a little expensive, but still, I'd much rather spend a little money to make sure an innocent person is not convicted than than to save a few $100 and convict a person and have them sit in prison.
But Jimmy, it's about who is in control and what is the vested interest for having black men in prison, and why there's so many black men in prison. And that's the question, and that is the answer. There is no vested interest for them to get these men in prison, because at the end of the day, the objective was to populate our prisons with black men.
Well, and plus, I guess the perception is that black men are criminals anyway, or we're preconceived to commit crimes. Even if you haven't committed one yet, you're going to. So I guess overall, people can clear their conscience by thinking, maybe you haven't done anything today, but tomorrow you will. So even if we do wrongfully convict you, we've probably done ourselves a favor to keep you from victimizing society in the future, which is, it's a bad thing. But my point overall is, when I see black people, I know people say this Kavanaugh guy is come from privilege, he's wealthy, so what if you ruin his life? He'll still survive. But see, that's not the point, though. The point is that he was confronted by a white woman who had no witnesses, nobody could back up her story. Everybody she said could elaborate what she was saying, couldn't. No evidence, she could remember anything, and just on her testimony alone, versus over 200 women that came and wrote letters and made statements, from girlfriends to high school, college, people he worked with, people who worked for him, people he worked for throughout his whole professional life. On his side, over 200 women saying he was a great guy. One woman saying he tried to rape her back in high school and couldn't get all her facts right. And just on that testimony alone, forget the preponderance of the evidence. The evidence was leaning his way, but just on her statement alone, with nothing else to back it up, there are so many people that were willing to throw this guy, and still even talking about trying to impeach him and kick him out of off the court.
Well, Jimmy, I think it is reflective of a much bigger issue where you have a lot of women who have been assaulted, who have been harassed, whether it's at the workplace.
They want somebody to pay.
They won't. Well, at the end of the day, a lot of these, women have been suppressed. Their voices have not been heard, and they are not in a position of power and influence to be able to bring those folks who have committed those crimes to justice. And so I think that this has been the quiet voice of a lot of women of all ethnicities who have had to suffer in silence, and that is what has been coming out with him, and in tons of other cases now that have now been branded as the meat. Well, you have to. This is the key. You have no one who represents them, who is the jury or the judge who lets their voice be heard. And so as a result of it, most of these women are not in a position of power. It's not that they're not speaking up, but I know women in particular who have been harassed. When they are assaulted, when they speak up, it's usually a man who is in a position of power who silences them. And so, unfortunately, they're not in a position of power to be able to do anything about it. And I think that's one of the reasons why you have so many women now who are now vying for political office, who are, going for judgeships, etc. Because at the end of the day, women represent a little bit over half of our population, but on the most part, they've had no voice for the last since ever.
Well, Tom, all I could say is, if you're a woman and you find yourself in that situation, one, defend yourself, fight back as best you can. The person may overpower you, but try to scratch a person in the face. Try to do whatever you can to resist. But on top of that, afterwards, take your cell phone out. Start jotting down details, identification marks on this person's body, things you remember. Call 911 and report it. Tell people so the rest of us who want to support you and get behind you can. But if it really comes down to you waited 10, 15, 30 years and then you want to speak up at some point when you think this person is getting ready to get a big promotion or get ahead in life, it's going to be difficult at that point to stand behind you at that point, because you have all the evidence is cold. It's gone.
Jimmy, I agree with you. The reality of it is, I know women who've been assaulted, who have been harassed or even sexually assaulted. They go to the police laugh at them, make them feel shame, make them feel like they are the perpetrator as opposed to the victim. And so as a result, a lot of these women, they suffer in silence because those who are in power, typically male, don't listen to them, and they get no justice. And so as a result, you've seen, I think, this quiet undergirding based upon the suffering of women for hundreds, thousands of years, because they've never been in a position of power to do anything about it, that is finally having its voice heard.
But if you come to power, Tom, that doesn't mean that because you've been oppressed in the past that you can become the oppressor.
No, not being the oppressor.
And what I would say to women once again, if you walk into your car and you're by yourself, take your keys and put them in between your fingers and make a fist. If someone attacks you before you get to your car, you may not be able to punch them and inflict much damage, but those keys will. You can scratch a person with keys. You can really cause some pain in the face of a man with your keys between your knuckles that way.
Yeah.
Learn to kick to the groin. Learn to poke in the eyes, to hit in the nose. I mean, that's soft tissue there. If you break it, doesn't take much. Generally, someone's nose starts bleeding that way from a broken nose, they panic and run away. I'm saying there are some things that women can do. All I'm saying is just don't take it. And if something does happen to you, someone does, even if the police laugh at you, even no one believes you, still go file a report. Make them at least record the incident. If you have any DNA evidence, make them collect it. Don't let them just push you out and say, hey, yeah, that's we'll take care of it and look into it and give you lip service. And my point is, don't let the person who did this to you get away with it and do it to somebody else. Not saying something is not a good solution. It is not a good solution. And I'm not trying to be heavy-hearted here, but it's hard for me and some people like me to get behind you when there's no evidence and everything is cold and it's just your word against that person's word at that point. Because if we believe you, his life gets ruined and possibly his life is taken away from him and he goes to jail. If you're lying, and we have some famous cases like the Duke lacrosse team that got lied on, who was LaWanna Broderick. I mean, we have cases.
LaWanna Browse, yeah.
Yeah. Even here recently, the linebacker with the Atlanta.
I didn't hear anything about that one.
I think his name is Baines.
Mm-hmm.
Come out of high school, he had a scholarship to USC. A girl he had sex with went back until, I guess, her mother found out, and the mother decided she was going to sue the school. Told the girl to say that the boy raped her. Mm-hmm. And long story short, they promised him 3 years and that he would be out of jail in like a year and a half, a good time and good behavior, and he would still be able to go to college and get on with his life if he just pled guilty to it. Well, they gave him 5 years that he had to serve, and then 5 years probation. So his life was kind of over with. Mm-hmm. Luckily, he was able to get her to testify, admit that she lied, and go back in the court to clear his name. And I believe Seattle gave him a tryout because their coach was at USC, who gave him the scholarship.
Pete Carroll. We're talking Pete Carroll.
Yes.
Right.
So when he got it, when all this was cleared up, Pete Carroll gave him a tryout. He didn't make the team, but Atlanta saw him and decided to pick him up. And I think he's still playing with Atlanta today. But all these stories don't always have a happy ending.
Yeah.
So my point is that don't put us in position, the public, to have to choose between you and someone else.
Yeah, we're going to have to continue this story because we're
way over time. I'm sorry. So let's wrap this up. And if you like the conversation, please come back. Please subscribe. Please hit that notification bell button so you'll know when new shows come out. And let's give a shout out to some of our sponsors.
We have Fitness 360.
And we have MOTC Telecom. And we also have Forest Films. And let's recognize some of the black businesses that we
Miss Mary's. Yeah, Miss Mary's out in Carrollton.
Really good food, people. Really good food. The smothered pork chops. You need to try.
There we go. And Off the Bone out in downtown Dallas.
Oh, yeah. So they have some good smoked barbecue. Not the smoked chicken wings.
Yes.
And very good barbecue.
Excellent.
Very good people, too. Good people.
All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and call it a wrap, but we want to thank all of our subscribers. Make sure that you subscribe to Black Men Speak and send us your comments. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, we will respond to all your comments. And if you have any subject matters that you want us to cover, please let us know. And we'll put them on our list of things to talk about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.